Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, I thought we'd do another thrift store haul since I hit some more books and movies and two CDs. So let's go through it. Hopefully, this will be a quick video. I've been getting a bit quicker with these videos because I've been doing them more frequently rather than having a lot of them pile up on my desk and then going through over an hour worth of media. So let's get started and see where it goes. All right. Okay. So first, I thought we'd start with some books. All right. The first is The Wings of the Dove by Henry James. All right. This is a Penguin English Library edition. You notice from previous videos that I've done, um, the English Library has these two stripes going down, published by Penguin. It's all the great English authors over their history, right? So they're popular books. I have not read The Wings of the Dove. It's a romantic novel, so I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever read it. Next up after that is an Oxford World Classic, Jane Austen's Persuasion. All right. So this version of, let me show you the the version that's out right now. All right. So this is what the Oxford World's Classics look like now. This type of paperback, right? All right. So this is the one that's previous to it. So these are the newer ones. These are the previous editions, right? So, but you can find a lot of them in really good condition, and the titles are great. Most of the Oxford stuff that you pick up is great reading, just like Jane Austen's Persuasion. All right, so this is another love story, which seems to be those romantic stories were big in the 1800s, right? So then we have Thomas Hardy's. I might as well show you that one again. Far from the Maddening Crowd. This one is extremely good. I think this one was his fourth novel. Yeah, his fourth novel, and this is the one that put him on the map. Uh, and it made him famous, basically. And this basically is well, it's an extremely good novel. Let's put it that way. And let me see here. Ah, yes. Okay. So what I did was I read a whole bunch of books during this era at one time back. I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. And sometimes I'll confuse one book with another book. But this book, if I remember correctly, all right. So this book is about a man named Gabriel Oak. Now, Gabriel Oak is this girl comes into town, all right, and what was her name? What was her name? Bathsheba, right? Okay, so Gabriel Oak is what? What he's a like a sheep herder, right? And he saves up his money and he gets a farm and then he meets this Bathsheba who's come into town to stay with her aunt or whatever, and he falls in love with her and asks her to marry him, and she says no. So there's basically this whole book is about him and two other suitors to Bathsheba. One is a sergeant in the military, and another one is a farm owner. All right, so and it goes through the lives of all four of them and how she ends up getting involved with all of them eventually. So it's quite a, I don't know if you call it a heartbreaking story, but it's kind of like a heart wrenching story from a male point of view. So it's really good if you like that kind of social interaction, and you get to see how rural England was back in the 1800s, right? So um, it's interesting, and the man can write. Let's put it that way. All right, so that's Thomas Hardy's Far from the Maddening Crowd. Did that one? I did not do this one yet. This is the Penguin Classics edition of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Aurora Leigh, which is basically a novel in verse form, like free verse, like like poetry, written in poetry. And there's other poems in here, but it's a long poem, and it's almost like a full novel, basically written in blank verse, right, or free verse, where free verse meaning the stanzas or the lines don't rhyme or whatever, right? So I haven't read it, so I can't really review it all that much. But according to the back, Virginia Woolf thought it was a great book, so maybe you will too if you read it. All right, so that one's that one. Next up is Moll Flanders, which is a Daniel Defoe novel, and this one, um, well, when it was published, nobody knew that it was Daniel Defoe, and I think they kind of figured out that it was Daniel Defoe that wrote this book. So then later on, when they published it, they put Daniel Defoe's name on it. I can't remember the exact nature of that, but I know that originally when this was published, Daniel Defoe wasn't known as the author, right? So anyway, so this one is a hell of a ride if you haven't read it. It's basically about what was the girl's name? Uh, Maul. Well, Maul Flanders is her name. Duh. All right. Um, uh, so Maul Flanders basically goes on the adventure of her life and gets involved with all these men looking for love or well, not really love, looking more for stability and security, right? And her life just goes like one roller coaster ride after another. I don't know how many kids she's had in this book, at least 10, at least of them by three or four different guys. So all either from trickery or from manipulation or um, she's trying to get married. So although it's written by a man, so it's a man view of a woman's behavior, right? But I don't know. Maybe Maul is like one of the one of the characters or protagonists in novels that would scare men off marriage. But in the end, I think it all works out. I can't remember. It's been such a long time since I read this book. But anyways, it's quite an entertaining book. Let's put it that way. And if you like Defoe, right, you should like this book. All right. Next up is Rousseau's Du Contrat Social, which is the social contract, which is basically Rousseau's biggest philosophical work. It's political philosophy. It's his argument of what makes a just state or the contract, the social contract, which means men come together and give up some of their freedom, the freedom that they gain from being in nature, right? If you're free to do anything, the only thing that stops you from doing things is your ability, either your intelligence or your physical ability to do things, right? When you're in a state of nature. So men come together to create a society, and they give up some of their freedoms for that group. But what is the most just way to organize that society? And he goes into that, right? And basically, it comes up with an aristocracy. If it's smaller town type of thing, you can have an aristocracy, a group of smaller group of people. But he always puts the power in the hands of the people or the sovereign, what he calls, all right. And the government and the sovereign are different, are two different branches, I guess, and the sovereign is just all the people that are in that village or whatever. But as you get bigger, he says you need to have, more the sovereign or the government needs to have more power to govern the people. So he says like a monarchy is probably the best way to do it. But anyways, his arguments are quite sound and quite good. I don't know if I really agree with all of them, but along with let's say Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes or the Second Treatise on Government by Locke or some other guys, it gives you a good idea on how things are formed and what the influence of let's say the government that you're under right now were influenced from, right? So um, this was written in the 18th century, back in the mid 1700s. So, um, and it's still around today. People still read it, right? And this is the original French version of it. It does come in the English translation. All right. So that's Rousseau's The Social Contract. Next up is Catcher in the Rye. This was big in school when I was going to school. It's basically, the poster boy for teenage angst and about a guy named Holden Caulfield who feels disillusioned with the world because everybody's fake and everybody's out for themselves and everything. And it's his travels around New York City, if I remember correctly. And it's kind of disillusioned. It's about disillusioned youth. A lot of schools banned this book because of its content. But when do book bans ever work, right? Uh, and it's basically the voice of a generation of angstful teenagers, let's put it that way. And it's still read today because of that. All right. So it's Catcher in the Rye by Salinger. All right. J.D. Salinger. Next up is Stephen King's The Gunslinger, which is the first in the Gunslinger series, basically about what was the guy's name? The gunslinger's name? Roland. His name is Roland, and he's out to find the the Dark Man or the Man in the Black Coat, or I can't remember the name what King called them, and eventually to get to the Dark Tower. Anyways, it's a dystopian type of novel. It's actually a whole group of novels, and this is the first one, and this is where I stopped. I think this is um, I think this is the first. Sorry, I think this is the last book that I read of Stephen King's. I think so. I think this was the last book, or it may have been the second one in this series, but I know this was the series um, that was it. No, sorry, this was the second last book that I read of Stephen King's. I read this one, and then I found it. So I read it, and I was going to find the second book in that series because am I remembering correctly that that series of books were written in little booklets and put out as he was writing them, like the Green Mile did? Didn't he go through a time period, King, where he was putting out these little novelettes, like little chapters of books, like because he's kind of writing them on the fly and he publishes them as he writes them. I don't know why the book companies wanted to do that, but anyways, and then once it's all finished writing, then they put it together in book form. I think the Green Mile was that way, and a couple others, and I think the Gunslinger series wasn't it set up that way as well? I could be incorrect. It's been a while, right? What, like 30 years or 40 years, something like that. Uh, so. Uh, so it was the last book that I read by him because of that, that scene in the sewer system when the kids are all trapped in the sewer system, they couldn't figure out how to get out of the sewer system, and then Stephen King comes up with the idea that the only way that they can do it is have a gangbang because there's like one girl and four boys or whatever, and all these adolescent teenagers, 13, 14, or however old they are, right? 12, 13, 14, somewhere around there. And so basically it's an orgy of 4-on-1 on the girl there, and she accepts it or whatever because it's the only way that they can get out of the labyrinth that is the sewer system of wherever they were, Bangor, Maine, or wherever he ended up having. Anyways, that kind of went, really? You couldn't have thought of something more interesting than that? Like, why would I want to read something like that? But anyway, so that kind of turned me off Stephen King. And it was the last book that I read uh, by him. And I haven't read anything since, really. My favorite books by Stephen King aren't really the horror films, and the horror books, anyways. It's this fantasy stuff, like what Eye of the Dragon. But my favorite is probably The Stand and The Talisman he did with Peter Straub. That was really good in this Gunslinger series. Um, I stopped though. I only read the first one, right? So, uh, but the first this is a really good read. So, anyways, all right. So I did Wings of a Dove. All right. Next up is poetry and the prose of Alexander Pope. All right, and this is a what is this? A Riverside? Yeah, Riverside edition of it. Like I said in lots of previous videos, I'm not a big fan of poetry. I just don't get it. Maybe I don't have that romantic mind or that emotional mind. I have more of a logical mind, and I don't really get poetry. I mean, there are some poems that have affected me, but I haven't. When I first started to read books like constantly, like over years, like from my 20s to like until I started wearing glasses in my 40s, and it became harder and harder to read. You know, then I started stopped reading. But for 20 years, I don't know how many books I read, but I read a lot of them. But I picked up poetry on occasion through that reading process, and um, I could never get into it. I, so I'd like read maybe 6 months later, I'd be reading whatever books I am, and I say, "I'll try poetry again. Maybe it's just that I haven't found the right poet to read or whatever." And so I'd pick up another poet and I'd start reading that. I go, oh, man, this just isn't interesting at all. I don't know. I'm not getting this, right? Um, so then I put the book down. Then I continue reading what I usually read, and then I'd pick up the poetry, and it never really did hit me. So, but poetry is good sales. Other people unlike me enjoy reading poetry, and Pope is one of the big ones. What is probably one of the biggest English writers of all time, right? English poets of all time. So next up is the complete works of William Shakespeare. I personally enjoy his comedies more than his tragedies or his histories or any of those ones. So um, I basically read all of his comedies and muttered through his different tragedies or histories, right? So, but his comedies, and he is the greatest writer in the English language. There's hands down. Um, and so I picked this up to resell it because I have a folio edition of all of his works that I keep. All right. And next up after that is Boswell's Life of Johnson. This is one of the most famous biographies of all time. Basically goes through the life of Samuel Johnson. Um, right? I haven't read it. It's the Oxford version of it, and here's an example of what I'm talking. Even though uh, this book isn't in perfect condition, it's historically important enough that I can resell it pretty easily, right? So um, even if it's in a little bit of banged up shape. Now, if you notice, the Oxford hardcovers that were put out at this time, they were all blue covered. Some are smaller, some are bigger, and they either have a big Oxford on the spine or Oxford standard authors. That's part of that library, right? But if you notice, whoever owned this book, all right, never put it in a plastic, like a Mylar protector, and their bookshelf was near a window. So here's the dark, beautiful dark blue and then you go, now look at that. That's what happens to your books when you leave them on the shelf in sunlight, right? So it's basically almost brown, right? So blue, brown, but this is supposed to be blue. But this volume, you don't come across this volume a lot on the secondary market. So when I saw it, I said, oh, I got to pick that up, and I'll resell it, right? So I don't really have a major interest in reading about Boswell's Johnson of the biography of it, but literarily speaking, it's one of the greats. So maybe I should. I don't know. All right, so that's some of the books. Let's do the two CDs that I did, and both of them are by Molly Johnson. Now, in previous videos, when I'm going over CDs and everything, all right, I speak of when I speak of jazz, I like two forms of jazz the most. I've mentioned before. One is saxophone-led jazz. So the albums that are saxophone-led are usually my favorites to listen to that don't have any vocals on them, right? But with vocals, I prefer women vocals over men vocals, and Diane Krall or Nina Simone. All those singers in jazz are really good, and one Canadian singer that's really good in jazz is Molly Johnson. I keep mentioning her, um, and I found two albums of hers that I didn't have before, and that's Lucky, all right, which is basically, I think this is her third. It's her third or fourth album. I have her first two, so this one I think is her third album, but I could be incorrect. Could be her fourth. When was it put out? 2008. All right, and basically this is her. When a jazz singer sings, they may do their own work, but eventually what they'll do is they'll do it like a songbook of some sort, where they'll take all the standards of jazz and sing them in their own voice. It's usually, at some point they'll end up doing that. Almost all the singers have, right? So this is hers. This is her version of that, right? So this is her version of all the standards, jazz standards, and it's called Lucky. All right. So and then I found this one, which is the Molly Johnson songbook, which basically is 16 songs off of her uh, first four albums. All right. So her first album was her first jazz album. I mean, she was in a whole bunch of different bands before that, going all the way back to like the 1980s. But when she started doing jazz and jazz vocals, she seems to have found her niche. She found her nook in the music world, and just blew up. Right. Uh, so she put out four albums. So yeah, so this one is her fourth. All right. So her first was a self-titled album back in 2000. Then came Another Day. Then came Messing Around, and then Lucky, and then uh, this one, which is a compilation of those first four albums, 16 of the songs off of those first four albums of hers. So, and it's a, what do you call it? A digipack. So I'm going to get a plastic cover for it, right? So that it doesn't get wrecked. All right, so that's Molly Johnson. If you have not heard of Molly Johnson and you really like vocal jazz, especially vocal jazz by a female, if you like Diana Krall. I keep mixing it as a Diana. I think it's Diana Krall, right? So, um, and she's got a an incredible jazz voice. Let's put it that way. And you may be interested in her. All right, so let's do some movies. All right, first up is George Stevens, the director of The Diary of Anne Frank, which is basically, what was she, like 13 years old? She was in the nook or the back of a place in Amsterdam, if I remember correctly. She was hiding with another family. It was two families in this small area behind a bookcase in the back. They called the annex or whatever. And she was hiding from the Nazis during World War II because she and her family is Jewish and the other family is Jewish. But eventually, the Nazis find them and they all ship them off to Auschwitz or whatever, and they all end up dead. I think there was one person that survived out of those two families, right? Um, so she wrote a diary while she was in the annex, and it became a really big biography or diary more than a biography, really. A lot of people read it, and it's an emotional book. Not you get to read what it's like to be a 13-year-old or whatever, right? A girl in you know Amsterdam during the Nazi occupation and the things that she talks about and worries about and everything, which is interesting. But what always struck me with that book was, you you finish it and the book isn't finished, but it's finished because you know what just happened to her when you finish reading the book. So you're reading it like she's alive because you're reading her diary, right? And you're reading it like she's a companion to you in her words, and then at the end of the book, it's not finished. There's other things that are going on that she going to talk about, but then it just ends, right? And you go, oh yeah, and then you get that depressed feeling or sadness, melancholy, I guess you could call it, uh, once you finish reading that book, right? So then they decided to make a movie of it starring Millie Perkins, and it's part of the um, Fox Studio Classics. This one is number 15. All right. So now I got another one in it. The last video that I did, I had two, I think. So this is one. So I think I might be up to 24 of the total of the 40 DVDs that are in this library. So I'm finding them. So hopefully I can finish that uh, series of DVDs, right? So, all right. Next up after that is Money Never Sleeps. Wall Street Money Never Sleeps by um, starring Michael Douglas and Shia LaBeouf, right? Who directed this? I think it was Oliver Stone, wasn't it? Yeah, Oliver Stone. So I collect Oliver Stone films. So this is basically a sequel to the original Wall Street. Basically, him, whatever his name was, can't remember what his name was. What was his name? Gordon Gekko. Gordon Gekko comes out of prison, all right, and he's going to get back into the game. Let's put it that way. I don't know how long he spent in prison, but it was a while. And he comes back, and then he wants to reestablish himself ruthlessly. Let's put it that way. All right, so that's Wall Street by Oliver Stone. Then we have a Blu-ray of 28 Weeks Later. Does Danny Boyle did this one? I don't know if Danny Boyle did the. No, it's directed by. I, the print is too small to read properly. But anyways, this is the sequel to 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later, and basically the rage virus that went through London or wherever, is finally pettered out, and they're going in with helicopters to reclaim the city or something along those lines. It's been a while since I've seen it, and there's a second virus or something because then all shit hits the fan like the first one did, right? So it's quite fun to watch if you like zombie films. All right. So next up is a sequel to uh, Machete, and that's Machete Kills. All right, Danny Trejo, Danny Trejo. Um, Basically, this is the sequel, and it's a B movie fun exploitation film, right? So you can't take it really too seriously, and if you like those exploitation films, which I do, um, you'll enjoy that film. I have it on DVD, but I don't have it on Blu-ray. so much. If you notice with the videos that I'm making, I'm at the point now where most of the stuff that I buy uh, are replacements for the stuff that I already have, either an upgrade from Blu-ray, from DVD to Blu-ray, or rarely but occasionally from Blu-ray to 4K, um, or to like a Blu-ray steelbook of some sort, right? So it's mostly just upgrading. I'm not getting a lot of new films because I have so many films, right? And the ones that I'm looking to add to my collection are more and more difficult to find, and when you do find them, they're more and more expensive to buy, right? So I'm getting at that ceiling point of my video collection. But each one of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, so 11 or 12 fit in each one of these squares, if you can see. And what I'm doing is I've been going through the squares. I'm on my fourth square right now in my library, watching the films in my library that I haven't seen yet, starting from the A's in the alphabetical order in the films that I don't collect the directors for. I'm going through those right now, and I'm on the fourth square now. So I think I've watched like 30 something movies in the last few weeks just to, and I'm going to eventually go through all 5 or 6 thousand films that I haven't seen and watch them, right? So, oh, and this is the last one, and this is The Legend of the Fist, The Return of Chen Zhen. Chen Zhen. Was, wasn't Chen Zhen? So it stars Donnie Yen, but that's not the reason why I got this film. But isn't Chen Zhen the guy that Bruce Lee played in Fist of Fury, Fist of no, Jet Li played it in Fist of Legend, and Donnie Yen. Okay, hold on, I'm getting it confused. Anyways, whatever it is, you probably know if you're a fan, right? Um, but the reason why I picked it up is because of her. You don't see her, but you'll see her name, Shu Qi. She's ever since I saw her in the first Transporter movie with who's the British guy, the bald British guy. Anyways, I'll put the name down here. You know who I'm talking about in the first Transporter film. I thought she had great screen presence, and it's cool listening to her speak English rather than Mandarin or Cantonese. I can't remember which of the Chinese languages she regularly speaks, but she is a beauty. Let's put it that way. And I was quite struck by her presence on film. So every time I see a film that has her in it, I will pick it up just on her account, right? So uh, this one I'm assuming is in Chinese with English subtitles. So I'll get to hear her speak her native language when she's acting. See if it makes any difference, right? So anyway, so Legend of the Fist on Blu-ray. All right, so and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 more books. Now these 4 books I picked up from the bookstore uh, that I used to work at, um, and these are all part of the Modern Library. Remember I talked about collecting the Modern Library? Well, here's Moby Dick, the original Modern Library. This is number 119. They're all numbered. There's about 800 in them. Now, how it works, so there's only maybe 450 numbers because what they do is when one goes out of print and they see that it didn't sell too well, um, that number on their spine goes up for grabs, and when they produce a new volume of a new title that they're putting out, they'll give it a number of the old title. So what happens is even though there's 800 and something volumes in in the library, there's only 400 and something numbers in the library, right? And this one is number 119. So you'll get duplicates of the same number, right? Um, so Moby Dick, everybody knows Moby Dick, right? One of the great American novels about a man going after a white whale, and it leads to his destruction. All right. After that is number 313 in the library, and this is Sophocles 2, which gives 4 of his tragedies: Ajax, the woman of Trachis, Electra, and Philo Philoctetes. How do you say that word right there? You tell me. All right. Basically, this is the Modern Library's, I think it's 7 volumes, it says on the back, of all the Greek tragedies, right? You have, like, when you look back at ancient Greece, there's 3 guys that wrote all the tragedies that survived, I think. I think there's only 3, right? You have Aristophanes that wrote a bunch of comedies like The Clouds or whatever, right? But in the field of tragedy, you have what? You have Sophocles, you have Euripides, and then you have, I don't know, that other guy. What is it? Achilles? I have a hard time with him. Aeschylus. That's right, Aeschylus. So it's 7 volumes of all their plays, right? And well, they put them on the back. There they are, all there. And there's 7 volumes in this, you know, mini collection inside the big collection, right? And this is volume Sophocles' second volume, right? So Aeschylus has 2 volumes, Sophocles has two, and Euripides has 3 volumes in the library. Okay, and next up after that is number 239, and it's the best condition out of all three of them, and it's the philosophy of Hegel. All right, Hegel, the German philosopher, extremely difficult to understand German philosophers, except for Nietzsche. At least that's what I found when I tried to read Hegel. And what do they have in here of Hegel's? Philosophy of history, history of philosophy, the science of logic, philosophy of right and law, or natural law, and some other political essays. Anyways, a bunch of his a representation of Hegel's work, right? And the dust jacket is in really nice condition, but there you go. Look at that. See it? Price clipped. All right. Isn't that irritating? Well, it is for me. I've mentioned numerous times in previous videos that, I mean, if usually those price clips happen because, well, even bookstores will do it, right? Used bookstores will do it. They'll actually clip them, right? So, but usually it's a person buys a book, sees that the price is on the inside jacket, knows that they could clip the price off, and the book is still good or whatever. Um, but it does diminish the value of the book, right? So, uh, and give it as a gift so that the person doesn't know what the price they paid for it, right? But anybody who reads or anybody who collects books and reads them knows what the pricing of books are. So, I mean, if somebody price clips a hardcover for me and gives it to me, I know that hardcover is going to be in the 30, 35, 40 range, right? I know it's not going to be $200, let's put it that way or something, right? So, um, why price clip it? But anyways, people do it, and even bookstores do it because, or they'll take a marker and they'll mark out the price, right? And the reason why they do that is because they'll put a price on the book that's more than what the book originally sold for. But if you have a book that's, let's say, 40 years old and it was selling for $2.95 at the time, and now hardcover books are selling at $40, sometimes they don't want to see that 2.95 shown to the people that are buying the books, because the people won't buy it because they say, "Wow, this book was only 2.95. Why is it, $30 new 40 if you buy a new one, and this guy has it like for 25 or $30, and originally new was only 2.95." Some people think they're being ripped off, even though they're not, right? It's just the passage of time. So they'll mark out the price on it to make it easier to sell, right? So, um, but it wrecks the book, right? Anyway, so all right, and the last book is the basic writings of Sigmund Freud. All right, one of the great. Let's start. The inventor of psychoanalysis, as they say, one of the greats in psychology. Basically, even though much of what um, uh, Freud wrote down is basically later to be proven incorrect or whatever, or his assumptions have been, basically it's where it basically starts though. So the best way to know a subject is to go back to the beginning of that subject and read from there. If you want to know engineering, I guess you could read the books, or learn the stuff that's going on now in engineering. But if you go through the history of engineering, you'll have an idea where things don't become rote, if you know what I mean. Like people learn mathematics. You could probably learn trigonometry, but you need to know, like, you know, arithmetic before you do trigonometry, and then algebra before you do trigonometry. Otherwise, if you are learning trigonometry, you may learn it in a rote way where you just repeat doing something over and over and over again, but you don't know why you're doing it, right? So you can get an answer correct in a math class if you remember what the teacher teaches you, but you don't understand why it's that way. And so once you forget the teacher's teaching, you go back. It's not like riding a bike. That knowledge is lost from you because you haven't, you know, had the basic part of it first, right? If you're going to fix a an engine in a car, you know, the engines nowadays are not the same as the engines, you know, in the 1930s or 40s, right? But the principles are mostly the same. And if you go through the history of it, then you can look at a motor nowadays and, you know, you'll get the training to do it. You could fix that motor now, but you wouldn't know why this is situated here or that is situated there. Or, you know, when you're trying to diagnose a thing, you plug it into a computer and the computer will tell you. But you know, if you're a really good mechanic, all you have to do is hear the engine or you know, look at the engine. You can figure it out after a while on what's incorrect about it, right? Because you know the principles of a, you know, a combustion engine, right? Um, so yeah, so history is important if you really want to learn something that will keep in your long-term memory and you'll understand for your life. Even if you forget a lot of it, what you can do is you start doing it again, and then you understand the reasoning behind it and how things work, and then, you know, it's very much easier to learn, right? So um, uh, that's why Freud is still read today, even though much of his stuff is, you know, debunked, right? So and this is, oh, so this is part of the modern library as well. This is G39. Okay, now G39, the G means giant. So there were books. So when uh, the purpose of the modern library was to compete with another publication called the Everyman Library. And what it was bringing books, hardcover books, um, at reasonable prices for your average Joe to be able to buy. So they're smaller than the regular size books. You know, they're almost pocketbook size, and they're printed on okay paper. You know, but um, you know, they weren't expensively bound books. Uh, the motivation was to make them, you know, a reasonable price so that people could afford to buy it and get an education without, you know, bankrupting themselves really. So that was their purpose. But there was just some stuff, you know, people at Random, is it Random House? Modern Library book. Modern Library became Random House, or uh, Modern Library was the main print uh, for the book company. But they started a side project called Random House, and they put out, you know, like newer novels and that these are more classic stuff. Modern Library. And they put out newer stuff under the moniker of Random House. And then Random House became more successful than the Modern Library. They stopped printing the Modern Library, and then they just took Random House. So basically, Random House owns the Modern Library, right? So, um, well, they did, anyways. Let's put it that way. So, but there were some books in the Modern Library that you couldn't put in this form. The print would be just too small. The words would be too small, and the size of the book would just be, there'd be many pages to do it. So they came out with the Modern Library Giants, right? And here's one of the Giants, right? It's the size of a regular hardcover book, the big size, right? I can't remember how many. There's just over 100, I think, 110, give or take, of the Giants. So I collect the Giants as well as the regular ones. So there's like 800 something of these, and just over 100 of these ones. So I got about 25 of these ones so far. Two shelves, three shelves worth of the Giants. Anyway, so that's everything. All right, so that went pretty well and pretty quickly. Correct. All right. So hope you enjoyed it. Did leave me a thumbs up. Think about subscribing if you haven't, but no pressure. And I will talk to you in my next video. And you have a great day. All right. And bye for now.